welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Corey Fonville Foster, and today is going to be a great show. I know this because this is a topic that I get asked about time and time again, and today we have an expert coming on. You may be thinking, what is the topic? What are we about to talk about? Well, we are about to talk about copy that converts. And to join me in this conversation, I have one of my good new friends here with me, Nicole Elliott. She is a conversion copywriter and a messaging strategist. So let's go ahead and bring her into the podcast. Hi.
Hey, Corey. Thanks for having me. And love the intro video, by the way. I haven't seen that before.
Awesome. Look, we trying to do a little something over here in the IROC world, so thank you for that. So before we get into the topic of copying that converts, I always like to give my guests a chance to just introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and kind of why did you get into business?
Sure, absolutely. So I am a conversion copywriter and messaging strategist. So essentially, I work with small business owners, entrepreneurs, industry experts who are really, really great at what they do, but might be having a bit of a hard time coming up with clear messaging as well as compelling copy. So maybe that's website copy, email campaigns, sales pages, what have you, that captures their voice and most importantly of all, resonates with their audience.
I love that, short and simple. And this is what we need. A lot of us are spending so much time making products, services, hosting events, showing up all over the place. And we find that our messages aren't landing, like people aren't signing up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's because a lot of times we don't have copy that hits our target audience and ensures that they will look, pay attention, and then do whatever our call to action is. So hopefully from this conversation, you'll give us some tips, some tricks, some strategies to do a little bit better at copywriting. Now, one thing I know, because I've talked to a few copywriters though, is that copywriting is a skill. Right? It is a skill. And so, we have 30 minutes to kind of get busy with the conversation. But guys, you may realize through this conversation that you're just not going to write your own copy, but at least you know the do's and don'ts. And hopefully we can talk about ways to maybe find somebody that is going to be a great copywriter for your business. I don't usually say that often. A lot of things I'm like, you can figure it out, you can learn. But copywriting is like people who are bakers, right? Some people are just good bakers. Some people can learn to bake a little this and that, but people who bake are bakers. I'm not a baker. I know that for a fact. I'm a cooker. And so it doesn't matter what recipes you give me. I'm only going to be so good. And then it's like, all right, I'm going to just go to a bakery. So copywriting kind of falls into that where I want you guys to understand the importance. I want you to know the do's and don'ts, but then I want you to realize that this is maybe something you may want to outsource because it is time consuming and it really is a skill that not everybody has. I'm just going to throw it out there. All right. So let's talk about it. First of all, what is a copywriter for somebody who's very new and they're like, I don't know what she's talking about. What's a copywriter?
Sure. Yeah. So there's a lot of different types of copy, or copywriters, but to just give like a really high level definition, essentially copy is just any type of writing or any words that are there to get someone to take some type of action. Or at least that's the case of conversion copy, which is what I focus on. So maybe that is having people sign up to your email list. Maybe that's encouraging people to come listen to your great podcast. Maybe that's having them, join your program, or maybe that's having them, forward your article to a friend. Like there's a ton of different things that are kind of baked into that. And there's also a little bit of like more brand copy, which is going to be, like advertisements you see where they're not actually super clear or about what they want you to do, but it's just for overall brand awareness. So we're not going to be talking so much about that one today, I don't think, since that's something that works best for, quite large companies who people already recognize their name.
Makes sense. So when you work with your clients, what are the main types of copy that you kind of focus on? Are you doing any ads? Are you doing website stuff? Like what type of copy brings you the most joy to write?
Oh, that's a good question. So I'd say over the years, I've had the opportunity to write just about everything for just about every type of industry. But over the years, my specialty has kind of shifted more into overall brand messaging strategy, since I really see that as like the foundation as well as the fun part of all your other copy. Website copy, I do a lot of as well as case studies. And case studies kind of just happen naturally since it's part of my messaging strategy or website copy process, I interview my clients, which is something I'm sure we'll talk about later on in the episode because it's a really important element of writing copy that converts. But so you may as well, get case studies out of the deal if you're doing the interviews anyways. But I also help with email campaigns and sales pages, what have you. But that's kind of where the starting points, at least.
All right, well, cool. Well, then let's start at the beginning. She said she has a strategy, right? So I don't even want to jump around. Usually I get to decide the flow, but let's just go through your strategy. Tell us a little bit, where do we start when we're ready to start working with you or just putting copy together for our brand?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say probably the starting point is to maybe just shift a little bit about how you think about copy. So copy is about more than just pretty words on a page. And so every copywriter is going to approach this a little bit differently, but I like to think of this in terms of two ingredients, essentially, to go back to your baking metaphor before. And so the first part is focusing very much on the brand or the individual entrepreneur that's heading up the business. And so that's going to include things like honing in on the brand voice and overall positioning, figuring out the value proposition, determining what words to use versus words to avoid, taking a peek at the competition to see what the best differentiator to lead with might be, determining whether or not you call it a program versus a course versus a methodology, sorting through how you describe and define your specific process. And so that's kind of the first ingredients that's really built around, the voice and the brand personality. And I kind of see that as the side that connects with your audience on the human level. But at the end of the day, as important as I'm sure we all think connection is to life and business, you also have a business, you want to grow it, so you need conversion. And so that comes in the form of the actual language of your audience. So I kind of see it as your voice and brand personality is what helps you connect with readers. And then the actual language of the audience is what's going to help you convert. And so there's a lot of different ways you can kind of gather this language. So I like to interview, as I was mentioning before. And when you're doing these interviews, you can look for things like core pain points, benefits, hesitations that keep popping up again and again, the features that maybe surprise people the most about using a certain service, certain questions they had, and just overall look for patterns. But if you don't want to interview, since I know that can be quite intimidating, or maybe you don't yet have clients you can interview, then there's definitely other ways you can get these insights. So whether that's looking at, like forums, subreddits, Facebook groups, where your audience is hanging out and seeing what they're talking about, or even, running surveys there, taking a peek at reviews for your competition to see what people like or don't like, even looking at reviews for Amazon for maybe, if there's like a book someone would turn to get like a solution to a problem they have rather than working with you. You can do a bit of research there and just take a look at the reviews and see what people are saying there. So there's all sorts of ways to get this language.
Wow, I never thought about interviewing past clients for copy on things that I'm going to put out. But that makes sense because my overall business, and I'm sure people listening, like your business solves a problem. So why not ask the people who you've already solved it for what they thought, what their takeaways were, where did they go, where did they start, where did they end, like their highlights of whatever the program was, because of course that could strengthen your copy. It's like ding, 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 ding.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you need somebody like you to kind of walk you through that process. Because some of the things you said reminded me of things I tell people for like their business plan, like knowing your audience, knowing kind of where you fit in the market, what are your competitors doing. And then we do a lot of that research too for when we're trying to make a product or service and we're thinking about how we going to sell this thing. So I think that we're going to have a theme that keeps coming back up of like doing your research. A lot of people want to skip that step, but it sounds like that is like one of the most important things. And I think that's why a lot of us fail at messaging, because it's like, yeah, we're just assuming what we think our audience wants to hear. We're throwing some pretty words together and posting it. And then we're like, why aren't they coming? What is that saying? They said, if you build it, they will come. That ain't true in business. That's not true in business. It's like, no, research first and then have a strategy. So once we have those two ingredients, what do we do next?
So that's where things get a little bit more tricky. So I often like to think that copywriting is a bit of art and a bit of science. So kind of those two ingredients I was mentioning before, that's essentially the quote science part of it, because you're collecting, data on your audience and building out guidelines around your voice and what have you. But then the art comes into play where you're figuring out how to actually negotiate that across the page. And so unfortunately, aren't necessarily hard and fast rules, but I can maybe offer up a few guidelines in case that's helpful. So probably just the biggest one is to make sure you're not going too hard in one direction or the other. So for example, let's say you go too hard in on audience language. And I will say I almost never see this as an issue. People are much more likely to go too hard the other way. But let's say you go too hard on audience language, then your copy is probably going to come across as a little robotic, and it's not really going to capture what's making you unique and different from the competition. So there's not going to be a lot of audience connection there, which is really important. But whereas if you go too hard on the voice and the brand personality and just the overall message you want to communicate, which is often done at the expense of the audience perspective, then it's really easy for readers to just tune out what they're reading because it's not resonating with them. And I mean, as you were saying before, that's really easy and common for people to do. And it totally makes sense because when you have your own business, your business is your baby. You have a very specific perspective about it and you want other people to share that perspective. But at the end of the day, even as you're balancing these two ingredients, I would say the more important is always going to be the audience perspective. So if you can prioritize that above your own voice and message, that would probably be the way to go. And probably just one last guideline I would offer is that even as you are integrating, more voice and personality into your copy, make sure you are never doing so at the expense of clarity. So I see that that's really, really common. Someone puts together a headline that's like kind of snappy, a little bit sassy, and just, overall clever, like a play on words or something. And again, maybe that's fine if you're doing like brand copy and you're just focusing on awareness. But if you're doing conversion copy and you want people to take some step, you're always going to want to prioritize clarity. So essentially, never do cleverness at the expense of clarity.
I like that. You said never do cleverness over the expense of clarity. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking back as we're talking of like copy that I've seen, and there's some copy that I see and I almost get annoyed because I'm like, it seems scammy because it's like, why won't they just tell me what they're talking about? Like, why
Right?
is it so woo woo? You got to book a call to find out what they I was like, just tell me, just what is this? Because then I can
Mm-hmm.
make a decision whether I want to engage or not. But if it's like a mystery, I think some people think that idea of like a mystery or cool title will overshadow the fact that people just want to know what are you trying to sell me? What
Yeah.
is this?
Mm-hmm. People are
And I like
busy.
yeah, I'm just like, and next, and next,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not
Right.
about to even go through this. So I love that. Um, so what are some of the things, because you talked a little bit about what you typically see, but what are some other kind of things that people do that are like, like you
Oh,
should have did that in the copy? Because I know you've seen a lot.
oh my
Because
gosh.
people probably make tons of mistakes before they even get to you. So what are some
Yeah.
of the things we should probably avoid doing, or that you see a lot of the time that you're like, please stop this?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess this is going to sound quite similar to what I was saying before, but just focusing too much on the company. So, I land on a lot of website pages, and the copy is just really, really focused on the company. And that's what I would call like me copy. So it has a lot of language like I, we, our, and it's just always told in their perspective. And, has things like our passion is XYZ, we're number one in XYZ. And the reality is that that is quite boring for people to read. And it's also not necessarily helping someone build trust in you because just because you say something, they're often not backing it up. So that's actually something I'll address in just a minute. So whenever possible, I recommend switching over to you copy. And so that is going to be the you in this case is the reader. And so that will be maybe that'll mean actually using the word you. For example, let's say there's a place on your website where you talk about, our passion is XYZ. Perhaps you can switch that by actually leading with you. And so maybe you ask a few questions about the pain points, like, are you struggling with XYZ? Are you kept awake? This is kind of rough, just to give you an idea, by ABC, rather than, leading with the company.
Oh my goodness, I love that. It's funny when I do these podcast episodes while the expert's talking, I'm going through my stuff and I'm like, what am I doing? What does mine say? Because I'm thinking of my clients. I'm like, what are they saying? Okay, cool. So I love that. Because in my company, we actually make websites for people, but they bring the copy. That's one thing we don't provide. And so I do see a lot of I, me's, we, the company type of thing. And so now I'll be like, hey, you might want to change that.
Mm-hmm.
But I love that Dip asking questions, because one of the biggest things I learned a long time ago when it comes to marketing is you really want your audience to say, me too, and not so what. And if they can see themselves in the things that you put out, they're more likely to engage. But because there's so much information out there all the time right now, it's like if it's something that could or couldn't be them, they just scroll right past because they're like, I don't have time. I want something that calls out to me, that names me. And I always tell people, like, I always say coaches and consultants all the time in my text, because that's who I want to attract. Look, I don't know if that's the right thing or the wrong thing, but that works for me. But it's because, yeah, I want people to say I'm a coach or I'm a consultant versus me just saying like small business owner. And then I get like a candle maker or something, because that's not who my target audience is. So look, she's laughing. I'm like, I hope that's right. But so those are things that you're like, don't do. What are some of the things that, even if you're not really good at like writing, that you could do besides the you content to help with your copy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have maybe two kind of quick win tips I can share here that really anyone can do. So they're not specific about copy, but they will help support your copy, say on your website. So the first one is a really easy one. So again, we're just talking about website copy specifically in this case. And that is making sure that you have a call to action on every single one of your pages. And so I can think of like an example recently, just for like a workshop I was putting together. I was scoping out some website copy online just to see what there was out there. And I came across this marketing agency and I landed on their about page. And it was overall a pretty interesting page. Like they had their portfolio, an engaging story, lots of community involvement. But then I got to the end of the page and there was no call to action. Like there was no logical next step for me to go, whether that is sending me to case studies, joining a newsletter or booking in a consultation. Like I was then required to, I obviously wasn't necessarily their ideal client. But let's say I was to then decide or make the decision, where's the best place for me to go next? And you never want to make your readers work more than they need to. I will add one caveat there is to make sure not only that you are adding the call to action, but adding a logical call to action. So for example, a logical call to action in this case, I think the very last part on their page, the last section was talking about like a nonprofit program they're a part of. So finishing up on a call to action, inviting them to learn more about that would not be the right choice, right? Especially not for the end of the page. As to another kind of quick win, this one works for any place you have copy. So sales pages, email campaigns, if you ever share those there, even sometimes in social media proof. And that's just to make sure you're using your testimonials strategically. So I know a lot of us, myself included, might be guilty of kind of just like dropping testimonials into the social proof spots on our websites, and usually exactly as they're written by clients, or maybe just slightly edited. And yeah, I know it's very common. And obviously, like any social proof is better than no social proof. But if you really want to get the most from your testimonials, then the real power lies in using them to strategically back up what you're saying. So you think about like when we were in 10th grade English class, and our teacher would always tell us, if you make a claim in your essay, you then have to back it up. And so you can do the same thing in your copy. So for example, let's say on a sales page, you have a section where you're talking about what makes a particular feature so great. So then rather than just following it up with a generic testimonial saying, oh, my experience working with, Corey or Nicole was smooth and easy, it's going to be much more powerful and persuasive if you can follow up with a testimonial that's actually backing up your claim about the actual feature.
Oh, that's a gem right there. I like it. That's something you definitely could do, because we have those testimonials and we bunch them in one section. What are people saying? And then you
Right.
just throw them all there and that's it, and you move on. But it makes sense to put it where it fits, so that as they read, they're like, okay, here are the benefits of this section. And then somebody's in a video saying like, this is what I did and I use this and blah, blah, blah. Makes perfect sense. I love it. Like, it wasn't rocket science. It made sense. So I know you don't do this all the time. I know you can do it, but you don't do it all the time because you do different types of copy. But because I know my audience who are listening struggle with email copy, I do want to just kind of touch on that for a second, because a lot of them there's a few areas where they struggle. one, they struggle with subject lines. People aren't even opening those
Oh,
emails. They're
yeah.
not opening them. And then when they are opening them, you talked about call to action, we talked about websites, but then they're
Mhm.
not clicking on anything because their call to actions are not landing. So generally speaking, what could we maybe do to get a better open and click rate when it comes to emails, because that's a lot of just copy.
Yeah.
What can we do? Because we want those emails open. We spend all that time thinking of email stuff to write. How do we get them to
Right.
open it?
Yeah. So the thing about emails is that it's not strictly about the copy. It's also about all the context behind who the audience is. So for
Mm.
example, under which grounds did they initially join your email list? Have you been emailing them consistently? If you haven't, or maybe if you're now contacting them about things that are not as related to why they first signed up, like people just aren't going, it's no longer relevant to them. And at the end of the day, there's just, not a ton you can do to re-engage people who are just not going to be the right fit. As to the subject lines, honestly, there's really not a hard and fast rule, because it's going to vary based on the audience. In my experience, I generally find that either really short subject lines work well, like I think for my personal list, or quite long subject lines. Or one thing that it's kind of like a common copywriting technique is to open up a curiosity loop in your subject line. So that essentially means you're not necessarily saying what's going to be there, but maybe you say something like, hey, quick question for you, or, oh, I can't believe this just happened to me, or, you know, kind of something along those lines. And then that'll get people to open. But if you're going to do that, make sure you are then closing that curiosity loop, because that's a major pet peeve of mine. You see that with like ads as well, who like promise something and then you click onto the page and it's like not at all. They're not answering the question that they're saying they're going to answer. And that's just going to kind of shred your credibility and all that. So just know if you are focusing on that curiosity bit, make sure you are delivering then.
Yeah, I think I've seen a lot more of that lately where they are saying, can I ask you a question, or things like current things that are happening, and then they're giving you a case study or something like that. And I actually do find that more interesting than just generic, information that's being thrown at me that feels like it's not time sensitive and nothing special about
Mhm.
it. So I do think that's probably a good technique, because I'm like, okay, they like, can I ask you a question real quick? And it's like, okay, let me see what they want to ask. Especially if I don't know who they are, it at least gets me to open it and give them a chance, before just like hitting delete, like, or throwing them in my spam folder or trash. So I
Yeah.
like that. Like I said,
Yeah.
I'm thinking as you talking, like,
Oh, taking notes. Good thing you have a recording.
yes.
One other thing I would also say about emails that I know works quite well with my list and for the clients I write for is story-based emails. So that's,
Yeah.
really leaning hard on kind of that connection that we're saying. So for example, like, let me see if I can get a good example. So there was a podcast episode that I was on recently and I wanted to share it with my list. And so instead of just sending out an email saying like, hey, come listen to this new podcast I'm on, it's tons of fun, I opened up because it was a bit more of a personal podcast than what I usually do.
Mm-hmm.
So the email, I think the subject line was 3 things you might not know about me. And so it opened up with like pretty, I mean, not things I usually talk about in a professional setting. So I think they were quite interesting little tidbits. And after sharing a bit about that, then I segued into, hey, like there's this podcast if you want to, learn more. And that works well. Like even if you're teaching something, you can, lead with a personal experience. If I could offer up like another example, I don't want to talk
No,
too
go
much.
for it. Go for
Um,
it.
this one was such a weird one, but last week I connected. I sent an email that opens up with a story about how my husband is excited every time he sees a deer. Because although he's from Brazil, which has as home to the Amazon and the highest species or highest number of species of animals in the world, he didn't grow up seeing deer like I did growing up in Minnesota and constantly having to swerve my car to avoid hitting them. So he gets excited when he sees them. And so the connection I made there, so I led with that, even had a picture of him at the top and everything.
Oh.
Yeah, it was very sweet. He liked it as well. He sent me like a little heart emoji after he read it. But the overall idea, then I connected it to the idea that like, hey, people are naturally drawn to things that are different and outside of their daily life and what's normal to them. And hey, that means true for your copy as well. So there was like a whole message baked into it that led with a story that got people to open. And I got a few responses back to it, and people are just like, this is hilarious. Like people really resonate. They like this type of thing because there's just so much like templates out there and boring messaging and, copy and paste. So people appreciate seeing something different and a personal experience as well, which no one else can replicate.
Exactly. I think that makes sense because you want to connect. Like, I think gone are the days of people just connecting with you because you of your business. They want to connect with you as a person, as a human on a
Mhm.
different level. And so, yeah, showing like the pictures that like the social media that does better is always like a picture of like you and the dog, you and your kids, you know what I mean, you on a walk.
Mhm.
It's not the well branded stuff. Now, you still need to have some branded content, and just like you need to have some value based copy in your emails. But I do think by having that real element of you, showing the behind the scenes of you, or even using something as simple as a picture to connect it to what you do as a business owner just makes perfect sense, because then
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, she's a wife, so I resonate with that with you. I definitely resonate with the idea of like being attracted to things that I don't see every day, like, oh, what's this, like the new shiny thing. And then of course I'm sure you get more value and that call to action. So now I'm like, okay, I like this person. This is nice. It wasn't a
Mhm.
boring read. It wasn't the same old, same old. And like I said, I connected with you now on a deeper level because you're not just a businesswoman like me. You're also a wife like me. And I do that too. I'll throw in the kids and be
Mhm.
like, okay, the kids too. So many people I've talked to this week, I've been like, yeah, I'm on spring break with the kids. If you're watching this, I'm on spring break right now. And they're like, oh gosh, God bless you. And we connect on that level of like everybody who has kids knows what it feels like when they're at your house 24/7 because there's a break. And now you connect more because they're like, if she can do it, I can do it, because busy business women. But yeah, I love that. So look, our time is running to an end, and look, we've covered a lot though. We've covered a little website copy, a little general copy, email copy. Is there any other copy that's really important for small business owners to think about? And if so, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh boy.
There's so
I
much.
mean, there's so much. Yeah. I mean, any copy you have is useful, but I think at the end of the day, most of the kind of overall ideas we've given here are going to apply. But maybe one last one I would touch on is case studies, since people don't tend to think of that in terms of copy, and it's not one I hear discussed a lot. So if you are going to go forth and conduct these interviews, like I've recommended, or even if you just survey your clients, what have you, I would highly recommend putting those into longer case studies. It doesn't need to be crazy long, but if you can integrate a bit of, most case studies we read are quite boring. But if you're able to integrate like a bit of actual quotes from the audience as well as with some narrative, and most importantly, making your client sound like the hero, not you sound like the hero, which is
Ooh.
not something I actually see very often. That's a really common mistake for people to just focus on the impact of their business. And that's when, then people don't want to read because it's not very interesting. But I think a case study it will always lend more credibility and weight than a testimonial. So just a great choice to, add on as well. And then you can also make sure you're using them strategically where you're sharing it to help back up your overall copy, as we were talking about before. But they're really valuable to make sure you're including as well.
All right, case studies. Check. We're going to get that. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
get some of those done. And I think, too, we have to get away from always trying to feel super comfortable in every business thing that we do. A lot of you have heard her say case study now like, at least 3 times. And every time she said it, I'm sure you were like, I'm not doing that. Because you don't want to. You're afraid of what they're going to say. You're afraid that they're going to say no. You're like, well, if I get them, how do I use them? But guys, just take that first step. If you know they're going to be beneficial, shoot your shot, ask your past clients. Most of them probably like you anyway. And if you keep it simple, they're not going to, say, oh my God, you're asking me to do too much. Keep it simple, get the results you need. Sometimes a phone call that's recorded is going to be some of the quickest ways to get them versus having them do a long drawn out survey, or maybe just put in a little form, ask them for maybe 10-15 minutes of their time, give them an incentive to participate, maybe give them a discount on a future product, something. But get it done whether you're uncomfortable or not, because then once you have it, then you could always find somebody to support you in figuring out what to use it for, or use it when it comes up. So I think that if you're going to take anything out of this podcast, even though you got a lot of content, shoot your shot. Go and try to do these case studies, because it's something I've talked to other copywriters and nobody has mentioned it. And I think it's a really cool idea that could really be a game changer to set you apart from the rest. So try it out. Look, that's my challenge to you guys listening. Try it out. I want to see some case studies. Like, just shoot me a message saying, like, I did it, because I think that'd be cool. And I will share it with Nicole to be like, hey, they did it. So that we know that you guys are listening. But before we go, Nicole, I always like to ask you to tell us if you have a last thought, but most importantly, tell them where they can connect with you in case they are looking for an amazing copywriter like yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So probably the final thought, just if I know copywriting can be really overwhelming to a lot of people. So if, even talking about like the case studies, if that made some panic rise up or anything, what I tell myself as well as my clients is just remember that it's all about connecting with people on the human level and just focusing on kind of the humanness inside each of us. So whether that's focusing on who you are as a human, as you're bringing, adding in your personality and voice and all that, or as it is focusing on the humanness of your audience by making sure you have a really good understanding of them. So just it's about being human is kind of what copywriting is in a nutshell. And as to where you can find me, you can find me on my website. So just Nicole Elliott, Elliott with two L's, .co. Oh, sorry. I just said CO twice there. And I'm also on LinkedIn. So if you hop over to my About page, I believe you will find me there, or as well as in the show notes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Nicole, for being on the podcast. This was great. Like I said, I think we at least interviewed one other copywriter, but as you can tell, I hope you listen to both. If you heard this one first, go back and listen to the other one as well, because this will let you know that copywriters specialize in different things. And that's actually what we talked about on the previous one, that you need to find the one that's right for you, right? The one that you can connect with, but also does a type of copy that you are looking for and can really help you move that project from where it is now to where you want it to be. Nicole gave us such amazing tips today. Like, I'm jazzed up, guys. Like, I can't wait to listen back because I want to take better notes and then implement some of the cool strategies that she gave us today. And if you got as much as I did from this podcast, I encourage you to go back and listen to some of our previous episodes. And remember, we drop a new podcast every single week here. And so, guys, with that being said, remember, I rock, you rock, we all rock, and we will see you next time.